I'm Kara Price. I have been a member of this congregation for just about 15 years now. But this is only the second talk I've ever given. That may change. It depends how it goes.
We'll get you
My spiritual journey, like everyone else, it begins when you're a child, really. I mean, I was raised in the Greek Catholic Church. It was Byzantine Rite. And much of the service was what I call a Latin call and response. The priest would sing the service, chanting, singing kind of voice. And there was a person, a chanter, who sort of responded. And it was all magical and musical. I understood nothing. It was transcendent. As long as I didn't know what they were saying, I was great. But I've always been somebody who questioned things, especially authority. And over time, I became unreligious and practicing no religion. And after many years, I discovered the Unitarians, who, encouraged questioning and accepted and supported people who traveled their own individualized spiritual paths, and that was the place for me. It eventually became evident to me that really I'm an atheist, albeit sort of a Fox Mulder type of atheist. I always keep the motto in the background, I want to believe. But I wanted to believe there was a God, but I kept meeting with stumbling blocks. First, in my mind, the creator or God or whatever it is we mean when we say those words, if there was one, whatever it is, was clearly an it, not a he, not a she. To me, God, creator, spirit, power is not a human thing, is not an anthropomorphized human thing. It's an it. It's so very other that I couldn't reconcile myself with calling it God, deity, whatever, or giving it any type of human personification. To me, it is a force or a power, not sentient, not really something that can be engaged in conversation or bargained with. So with that thought in the back of my mind, I continued along my spiritual journey. And as I moved from these sort of established mainstream religions that were Christian-based, I moved on sort of to more pagan practices. Because to me, the Christian-based religions, that's mythology, no different from Greek, Celtic, Norse, Hindu, Native American. The story of Jesus is a story for instruction to me, or comfort. It's not different from the stories about Zeus, Aphrodite, Thor, Freya, Frigid, Lugh, Morrigan, Sekhmet, Baal, Bast, Isis, whatever. It's mythology that we use to help us through our lives for either comfort, inspiration, guidance, whatever. So I decided the pagan practices might be closer to what I had in mind when I was thinking about what this it is. Because I knew that the pagan practice included an acknowledgement of powers and forces, and had rituals that were geared toward a way in which those powers might be influenced. The pagans acknowledge energy work and the forces of the earth, air, fire, water, the elementals. That seemed a more practical and believable way of experiencing a deity rather than talking or bargaining. And I began to study some of the pagan disciplines in an attempt to gain more of an insight into what this God or creative force or whatever was. What was out there? Much to my chagrin, the pagan practices I found, to me, were just a rehash of Christian religions, substituting gods or goddesses for the Christian God and proceeding in the same fashion, praying and making offerings in an attempt to bargain or elicit the good graces of a goddess or a god. And also relating to those gods and goddesses as if they're human. And while there was much in Wicca and Druidry to help me in my journey, especially learning about the energy work and the earth forces and all that, the actual practices seemed to acknowledge, that we could sacrifice and pray and offer up things to influence those powers in a way that we desired to help benefit ourselves. I have tried many of methods in the pagan practice, and never have I seen any basis on which to form a belief that they work. I mean, nothing to convince me that we can interact with God in a meaningful way, make God respond to anything we have to say. I don't believe we can. Mostly I believe The practices, offerings, and rituals serve to influence and change the individual or the individuals who participate in them, rather than the deity out there who can help or save us. And that is the value to me of the practices and the rituals, the energy work in the pagan realm, to help transform the individual rather than an interaction with some deity out in the great beyond. For a time, I was a member of a Druidic rite group called ADF. It was a Druid fellowship in which a pagan church based on ancient Indo-European traditions expressed through public worship, study, and fellowship. Basically, someone, took whatever historical record they could find in Druidic practice and made up the religion. Okay, cool. To me, that's pretty much how they all came about, so that's all right. They had a great reverence for the earth and our connection to it. They conducted rituals and incorporated many aspects of the earth and our elemental connection to it. They also adopted gods of all different pantheons, and you could take your pick as to which one you wanted to do at any given time. In fact, you didn't even have to stick with one group or another. And for a while, I participated, and I thought of the God work in metaphorical terms. However, that is not how this group really practices its religion, I discovered. I had an opportunity to talk with a man who has now become the archdruid of the group, which is sort of like, the Pope in the Catholic Church. He is the head of ADF. But when I was talking to him, he was sort of still in the priestly hierarchy or whatever they have. I explained to him, I don't really believe in God or gods, but I use the God word metaphorically and, to do it that way. And he looked at me blankly. He says, how can you be an ADF if you don't believe in the gods? Well, I suppose a metaphor was not good enough for him. And he's the head honcho in that group. So that ended my foray in ADF Druid practice. My second stumbling block in the pursuit of God in my spiritual practice is language. And it's always been, really comes down to language. C.S. Lewis, who wrote the Chronicles of Narnia and other novels, was also a religious scholar. And in his writings, he spoke on the question of referring to God in masculine terms. He said that the question has nothing to do with what we would like to do, but rather with what God tells us to do. Well, I'm glad he can talk to God. Well, we all can talk to God. I'm glad God can talk right back to him, because that doesn't happen to me. He said, and now I'm quoting, "Goddesses have of course been worshipped. Many religions have had priestesses, but they are religions quite different in character from Christianity. Since God is in fact not a biological being and has no sex, what can it matter whether we say he or she, father or mother, son or daughter? Christians think that God himself has taught us how to speak of him. To say that it does not matter is to say either that all the masculine imagery is not inspired, is merely human in origin, shocking, or else that thought that though inspired, it is quite arbitrary and unessential, equally shocking. And that this is surely intolerable," says a Christian scholar, C.S. Lewis. I don't know, I'm fairly tolerant. But overwhelmingly in Christianity and the Catholicism I was raised in, God is definitely he. The Bible and especially the New Testament is full of male God language. Him, God the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, the kingdom of heaven. Now we can say the references are metaphorical. Or as C.S. Lewis says, we are doing what God has told us to do. We can say that many languages ascribe gender to words of all things and have no word for it, or a neuterless pronoun, genderless pronoun. Semitic and European languages, Arabic, they all genderize things, both animate and inanimate, into masculine and feminine. So this can be an explanation of how this developed. Or we can follow goddess worship. We can ascribe female words and characteristics to deity, or incorporate male and female deities into worship. Many would say gender language is metaphorical, referring to God as Father is metaphorical and God is pure spirit. I say bunk. If God is pure spirit, that sounds very much like it to me. And unfathomable. Pure spirit. Okay, then let's call God it Take the gender markers out of spiritual experience. Deity is not he, it is not she. There's no him or her. Deity's an it. There's no gender, there's no humanness. From a website called Understanding Islam, I found the following. It is interesting to note that Allah is the personal name of God in Aramaic, the language of Jesus and a sister language of Arabic. There's no gender to Allah. We can't say Allah the goddess. There is no God, but He, the living, the everlasting. He isn't a woman to beget children, nor a man to father them. While He is the God of all peoples and genders, He isn't the resemblance of any, lest He discriminates in form, and equal to Him is not anyone. So, the gender of God can be viewed as literal, or as an allegorical aspect of a deity. In polytheistic religions, gods usually have gender ascribed to them so that it enables them to interact with one another and interact with humans. Most monotheistic religions, there's no comparable being for God. Monotheistic, one God. And to relate in a literal gender-based way, so you can't really, shouldn't be able to. The gender of the one and only deity is most likely an analogy or metaphorical. In Judaism, although God is referred to in the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, with masculine imagery and grammatical forms, Jewish philosophy allegedly does not attribute God to either sex or gender. In the oldest of the Hindu scriptures, the Rig Veda, the first word of the Rig Veda is the name Agni, the god of fire, to whom many of the Vedic hymns are addressed, along with Indra, the warrior. And these two are male divinities. But in some Hindu philosophical traditions, God is depersonalized as the fundamental life force of the universe. However, while many Hindus focus upon God in the neutral form, Brahman being of neuter gender grammatically, there are Hindu traditions that conceive of God as female, even as the source of the male form of God, sort of the opposite of, first Adam and then out of Adam comes Eve. In Sikhism, God is consistently referred to as He and Father. However, they also say God is indescribable. So I assume it's metaphorical. God in Sikhism has no gender. It's described as energy that prevails throughout the universe. And animist religions, featuring natural forces, shamanic spiritual guides, they often but not always attribute gender to spirits considered to permeate the world. And polytheistic religions almost always, as I said, attribute a gender to their gods so that the gods can interact. And, you have sort of like, Zeus and Hera and all the Greek gods. So the stated consensus, it seems to me, after looking around in the religious world, is that why we use he or she as a pronoun to refer to God. God does not have a gender. This is meant metaphorically. God is pure spirit, and it, if I ever heard of one. Yet no traditions I have read, in no tradition is God or deity or that spiritual force referred to as it. None. Most of us here have been raised in some sort of a Christian tradition or been greatly exposed to it, in which masculine words are used for referring to God. Now, this is not a feminist diatribe, just wait. I'm getting there. So, according to C.S. Lewis, since God is not in fact a biological being and has no sex, what can it matter whether we say he or she, father or mother, son or daughter? What can it matter? And yet, the people who say he never say she, and the people who say she don't say he. What can it matter? It matters. Language and symbols inform how we think. It shapes the very way we think from the time we're children. It influences our worldview, our visions of ourselves, and how we relate to the otherness of God. Now, the problem with using masculine words in the religious or spiritual experience is that God is not male. Everybody seems to be, agreed on that. But we experience God, when we do this, as masculine. And we come to imagine God as anthropomorphically male. Historically, doing this has functioned as a religious legitimization of unjust social structures, male privilege and superiority, patriarchy. That basic principle underlies not only the subordination of women to men, but also one race to another, colonies and master nations, children to adults. It's fundamentally a masculine power structure where all relationships are understood in terms of superiority and inferiority. Also, patriarchy is essentially hierarchy, power and authority exercised over subordinates, and it is believed to be derived from the will of God and in the name of God. At least, that's how it's developed over time. And clearly that creates a problem with religious experience or spirituality for both men and women. It's no wonder that spiritual practice grew, restoring feminine to the deity. No wonder, making it possible for women to experience themselves as able to participate in a credible religion. And that there has been a reemergence of religious traditions in which women and women's experiences are central and valued. In a lecture that was given by a scholar, Sandra Schneider's is her name, and it's a published pamphlet called Women and the Word. She wrote about the gender of God in the New Testament and the spirituality of women. And I want to read you a portion of what she says. It is not primarily abstract ideas which affect our spirituality, that is, our experience of and with God. It is the imagination which governs our experience of God, because it is the imagination which creates our God image and our self-image. Consequently, if the demonic influence of patriarchy on the religious imagination is to be exorcised, if the neurotic repression of the feminine dimension of divinity is to be overcome, the imagination must be healed. It is absolutely imperative that language, which appeals to the imagination through metaphor, symbol, gesture, and music, be purified of patriarchal overtones, male exclusive references to God, and the presentation of male religious experience as normative. We must learn to speak to and about God in the feminine. We must learn to imagine God in female metaphors. We must learn to present the religious experience of women as autonomously valid. The therapy of the imagination is an affair of language in the broad sense of the term, and it is crucial that we cease to trivialize this issue and begin the long process of conversion from the idolatry of maleness toward the worship of the true God in spirit and truth. Well, Sandra Schneider's is a New Testament and Christian spirituality scholar. Her lecture, that I took that quotation from, is attempting to to show that institutional Christianity can be a place where educated and aware women can find a place and understand God and Jesus, and to show them a vision of Christianity which does not glorify masculinity at the expense of femininity and does not justify the oppression of women and men. A tall order. Good luck, I say to her, in the Christian realm. Good luck. Now, we also have Carol Christ, who is a leader in the women's spirituality movement, and feminist theology. And she wrote a much published essay, which you can just Google and read online, Why Women Need the Goddess. And she said, even people who no longer, quote, believe in God or participate in the institutional structure of patriarchal religion still may not be free of the power of the symbolism of God the Father. A symbol's effect does not depend on rational assent, for a symbol also functions on levels of the psyche other than the rational. Religion fulfills deep psychic needs by providing symbols and rituals that enable people to cope with crisis situations and human life, death, evil, suffering, and to pass through life's important transitions, birth, sexuality, death. The simplest and most basic meaning of the symbol of goddess is the acknowledgement of the legitimacy of female power as beneficent and an independent power. If the simplest meaning of the goddess symbol is an affirmation of the legitimacy and beneficence of female power, then a question immediately arises. Is the goddess simply female power writ large, and if so, why bother with the symbol of the goddess at all? Or does the symbol refer to a goddess out there who is not reducible to a human potential? The many women who have rediscovered the power of the goddess would give 3 answers to this question. The goddess is divine female, a personification who can be invoked in prayer and ritual. The goddess is symbol of the life, death, rebirth energy in nature and culture and in personal and communal life. And the goddess is symbol of the affirmation of the legitimacy and beauty of female power made possible by the new becoming of women in the women's liberation movement. However, as I stated earlier, and now with a twist, the problem with using feminine words in the religious or spiritual experience is that God is not female. But we experience God as feminine. We come to imagine God as anthropomorphically as female. Same problem, different gender language, in my opinion. Both ways, to me, are problematic. As far as I'm concerned, whether we use masculine or feminine words to describe our interface with the pure spirit, we're just creating that deity in our own image, or in whatever image with which we can comfortably relate. It doesn't go the other way around. God didn't create us in God's image. We create it. We are the force. It's mythology, really, and we've created all of it all along. There's no problem with using mythology to guide us through our lives, but let us now not mistake the mythology for the one true mythology. Let's not say, oh yes, my mythology is the one true mythology, and then castigate others for not following our God, or our goddess, or our gods and goddesses. So, back to the question. Why do we refer to God as he or she? The gods or goddess rather than it? Because it's not in the literature. There is not a spiritual, religious works that refer to God and say it. It's not out there. Somehow it seems more comforting and accessible to use he or she. And it allows us to relate personally to a personality rather than an other unknowable, unreachable pure spirit. So it allows us access to that deity. I could not get past all the male or female references to God as a person, and whether that person, he or she, whatever. Can't get past it, which is why now I consider myself an atheist. He or she, the pronoun used does not matter. I believe they're equally inadequate. To me, the problem occurs when we anthropomorphize God. I mean, we can do it as a mythology, we can do it as using a story to help us learn a lesson, or to help teach a lesson, or to help give us comfort. But when we're trying to understand pure spirit, the most appropriate pronoun for reference is, to me, neutral, it. And I have found, like I said, no religious or spiritual tradition who does that. What is the right way to speak about God? Whatever we damn well please, it doesn't matter. No language about God will ever be fully adequate to the mystery that it signifies. We have created God in our image. We're participating in the mythology as a path for personal development. And in that context, there are enough old myths out there to pick and choose from. Whether it be Yahweh, Jesus, all of the Greek gods, the Celtic gods, the Egyptian gods, goddesses, it doesn't matter. There's plenty out there. And none of it has anything to do, in my opinion, with the nature of God, but more with our nature. How can we relate to and use God in getting through our daily lives? That's the function it performs. So, I am without religion. That's why I refer to myself as an atheist. And now, I read and work on spiritual practices that do not involve a personal interaction with God, primarily. I mean, I use them, of course, but as a means to an end, as a metaphorical way to sort of get around the idea that pure spirit is unknowable. I'm an atheist, even though I want to believe, as Faulkner would say. And there are forces and powers out there. My journey now is sort of an exploration of how to connect with them, and failing that, how to understand the truth that is, quote, out there. The truth is out there. But we make it. So, in conclusion, I think that the reason we use gender language for God is so that we can have a personal connection to a God. And yet, it's something out of our own creation to assist us in getting through our daily lives, and should have never been formed the function of exclusion, of oneness. This is my one true, this is the only true path. In my opinion, none of it's correct. God isn't it. It's pure spirit or pure energy or some other unknowable force that we attempt in our little lives through whatever means we find available, whether it be mythology or science, reason, whatever way we try to find a way to connect to that pure spirit.